All month long, we've been looking back at what the critics said about some of the spookiest games of all time, including everything from Splatterhouse to Friday the 13th. Now that Halloween is finally here, it's time to take a look at 3 16-bit classics that are all memorable for completely different reasons. I'm talking about Decap Attack on the Genesis, the pinball Great Devil's Crush, and Electronic Arts Ghost Simulator Haunting, starring Polterguy. Yeah, those are definitely horror games. But are any of them actually worth playing? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, Sega Power, Video Games and Computer Entertainment, and more classic magazines that reviewed these games back when they first came out. Oh, now don't get too comfortable in that chair because the furniture is coming to life in this fright-filled episode of Halloween Review Crew. Before there was Decap Attack, there was Magical Hat, a Japanese anime from 1989 that ran for about a year. This simple story of a boy who falls into a volcano and discovers that he's a descendant of the Magical Hat was turned into a Genesis game by developer Vic Tokai. When Sega decided to release the game internationally, they ran into a licensing snag that forced them to make major changes to the art, the story, the music, and even the level designs. The result was Decap Attack, a horror-themed action game starring Chuck D. Head, a headless mummy that, you guessed it, throws heads at a bunch of ghoulish enemies. It's weird, baffling, and extremely morbid. And it was also completely overshadowed by the rest of Sega's 1991 lineup, including Toe Jam and Earl, Streets of Rage, and a little game that you might have heard of called Sonic the Hedgehog. But we've already covered those games, so let's go ahead and see where the critics landed on Decap Attack. Despite being overshadowed when it first came out, Decap Attack was largely praised by the critics. In fact, there was really only one outlet that didn't like it, and that was Megaplay, giving it an average score of 5.5 out of 10. Dave explains that this game gets an A for originality, but in the end, it's just another very average action game with a cute gimmick. The presentation of the graphics and play just didn't stay for me. Mike, on the other hand, liked the game enough to give it a 7. This shows a lot of promise. It has an original theme and solid gameplay that make it one of the more interesting action carts available. The end bosses are also animated extremely well. From there, we see that most of the magazines gave this game around an 80%. GamePro, for example, went with a 4 out of 5, while Video Games and Computer Entertainment went with an 8 out of 10. That's the same score that we saw from Game Informer in their very first issue. Andy, the game dandy, noted that Decap Attack starts out easy enough, but it gets harder as you go along. There's a lot to learn about hidden treasure, purchasing potions, and tricks like bouncing off of the walls. It's easy to enjoy and tough to master. He concluded that this game is addictive. There's enough to keep even the best player busy for weeks. Moving on up, we see Sega Pro give the game an 81%, while Mean Machine Sega went with an 82%. Speaking of which, you also see an 82% from Megatech. Perhaps out of crazy, Pill's Game Zone gave Decap Attack a 5 out of 6 and wrote this surprisingly coherent review. Massive and complex graphic adventure. More than a nod towards the likes of Sonic and Mario, Decap is highly addictive and very well put together. Nice one, Sega! Now when it comes to the highest score, look no further than Sega Power, who gave the game a score of 93%. That's actually one of the highest scores they gave of any game in 1991. They praised the speed, the playability, the huge levels, the lack of cheap deaths, and so much more. You won't find much that's very new in Decap Attack, but it's still a really superbly executed game. It's easy and logical enough for anyone to get into it, and once you start playing, you won't want to stop. The animation and cartoon quality graphics are great too. Unmissable. This is definitely one of those games where there's an outlier on both sides of the average. Believe it or not, 7 of the 9 magazines ended up giving Decap Attack somewhere between an 80 and an 83%, which means that basically everybody was on the same page here. Even with those outliers, the overall average is still a pretty solid 80%. If you were a pinball fan who also liked horror, then you really only had a couple of options in the early 1990s. Either you could pick up that Pinball Jam game on the Lynx that came with Elvira and the Party Monsters, or you could get Devil's Crush on the TurboGrafx-16. This was actually the follow-up to the 1989 pinball game Alien Crush. Only this time around, developer Compile traded in science fiction fun for demonic horror frights. There were skeletons marching about, dragons breathing fire, cultists summoning demons, bubble-blowing skulls, and at the center of the board, a woman's face that slowly gets more possessed as you play. This is a video game pinball game that took full advantage of the video game element, creating mini-games, boss fights, and ghoulish enemies that simply couldn't be done in a real pinball machine. I loved this game as a kid, but what did the critics say? Now, I normally like to check in with Electronic Gaming Monthly first, as they tend to be in the middle of the pack when it comes to the review scores. However, this time around, they're at the very bottom. It's real easy to look at the 6.75 out of 10 average and say that they just didn't like it. But that's not the full picture. This is one of those games where there was a big disagreement, with one of those critics bringing the average way down. In this case, it's Steve, who gave Devil's Crush a 5 out of 10. This is a decent follow-up to the first Turbo Pin Alien Crush, but there really isn't that much to it. Sure, it plays like an entirely different pin, but the same formula of bonus rounds and scrolling playfield leaves something to be desired. Sushi X, on the other hand, strongly disagreed, giving it an 8. Despite a few inherent flaws, this video pinball is a blast to play. Beautiful graphic presentation and sophisticated music kept me enthralled for hours. Lots of secret bonuses and bonus rounds enhance play for all ages. Like I said, EGM scores the outlier here, with every other magazine giving the game at least an 80%. That includes Video Game and Computer Entertainment, which gave it an 8 out of 10 in their 21st issue. Devil's Crush offers a much greater variety of bonus screens. Several even include 2 sets of flippers mounted side by side. Another improvement is the inclusion of the 2-player alternating mode. No turbo tap or second joystick is required. Like Alien Crush, you can shake the table slightly with the 2 button, and you can also choose between fast and slow ball speed. In this game, even the slow speed is a decent challenge. Devil's Crush is a must-have for those who enjoyed Alien Crush, or for those who thought the original was too simplistic. It's loaded with more clever animation, impressive graphics, and fast, frenetic action than the original. As we continue our ascent, we see Megatech give Devil's Crush an excellent 91%, which just so happens to be the exact same score that Ray's gave it. Now, while the highest score belongs to Computer and Video Games, who gave it a 94%, I'd rather check in with a magazine that we've never covered before, and that's Zero. Giving it a 93%, they told you to forget about pinball machines like Star Trek and Kiss. This computerized pinball game shoots the balls off of the opposition. Unlike conventional computer pinballs, Devil's Crush is set on 3 main screens which scroll into view. Computerized pinball games haven't proved very successful in the past, but Devil's Crush has the best attempt yet. The game manages to combine the excitement of traditional pinball machines and the explosive action of shoot-'em-ups. The graphics, sound effects, and gameplay in Devil's Crush shadow any computer pinball game so far. Even with the low score from Electronic Gaming Monthly, Devil's Crush still managed to earn an overall average of 87%. That makes it one of the best reviewed pinball games of all time, and it really is a true gem on the TurboGrafx-16. This is, hands down, one of my favorite games ever. If you've ever watched a ghost movie and thought about how much fun it would be to haunt a house and scare unsuspecting victims, then you're definitely not alone, because that's precisely the jumping off point for Haunting, starring Polterguy. Having already dominated the sales charts with both Madden and the Strike series, this was an example of Electronic Arts having the luxury to take a few chances. In this case, it's a game about a teenage ghost who gets his kick scaring the stuffing out of a bunch of cartoonish characters. It's a legitimately fun concept, but were the critics into it? Well, as it turns out, the answer to that question depends entirely on which magazine you subscribed to at the time. Several magazines loved it, a few hated it, and then the rest were somewhere in the middle, all circling around that 75% zone. Let's just start at the bottom and then scrape our way up. When Sega Power reviewed the game in their 47th issue, they were not impressed. Giving Polterguy a score of 51%, they called it strictly a one-hit wonder. Once you've played through it and seen all the animation, it's only good for filling space on a bookshelf. And what's with the huge price tag? Now, working our way up, we see Hyper give the game a 60%, while Computer and Video Games went with a 75%. This is the same score that we saw from Sega Force Mega, however, it's Video Games, the ultimate gaming magazine, that I want to look at. Giving the game a 7.6 out of 10, they argued that this kind of fun lasts for a while, but it begins to wear thin when you realize that aside from a few cosmetic changes, this is all the game has to offer. And the game has a propensity of insultingly stupid inner titles, the result of lots of wasted time reading irritating messages from a tragically hip anti-hero. Still, there is a method and a mission to all of the madness. Bring Polterguy back to the living, and that will keep you playing long into the night. Picking up right where we left off, game players ended up giving Haunting a 78%, only 5 issues into their 1993 resurrection. Electronic Games also gave the game a 78%, though they were 13 issues into their 1992 resurrection. GamePro, on the other hand, went all the way up to a 4 out of 5. Haunting is a spook fest that's over too quickly. It isn't going to give you nightmares, no gruesome graphics or crunching challenge. Just the same, this game qualifies as a fun fright to the finish. So if GamePro wasn't the top scorer, then who was? Mean Machine Sega certainly made a strong play of it, giving the game an 86%. However, the biggest fan of Polterguy was, believe it or not, Game Informer, who went all the way up to an average score of 8.9 out of 10. Paul, the pro player, exclaimed, "Whoa! Your mission is to literally scare a family out of their shorts," which makes for some super animation of the family and affected objects. I don't think I'll ever look at furniture the same way again. It has great background music and sound effects. You'll find tons of enjoyment and laughter in one of the creepiest carts around. Move over, Beetlejuice, there's a new spook in town. While most agreed that there actually was fun to be had in Haunting, the general consensus was that the game was too short and didn't offer enough variety. Not a bad game, but also not a great one. The result was an overall average of 75%. It has a great concept, but the execution misses the mark. Hey, thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post episodes just like this one every time classic games get added to modern consoles. And occasionally when they aren't added to modern consoles, like today. We have a whole playlist with more than 100 of these review crew episodes. Now, here's the question I have for you. What's your favorite 16-bit horror game? Oh man, there are a lot of good ones that we didn't even cover this month, including major franchises like Castlevania and Ghouls and Ghosts. Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we're going to be back next week with more reviews, including some of those horror games that I couldn't get to this week. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.